The infamous past of Dunkirk, the greatest rescue in human history. Imagine waking up to a sound that doesn't belong to the night. Not thunder, not the wind, but a low, rhythmic thumping that vibrates right through your floorboards. You look at your watch, it's 3 a.m. You look out the window and the horizon isn't black anymore. It's a violent, glowing orange. In May of 1940, the citizens of a small, unsuspecting town didn't have to imagine this. Within hours, they were trapped. Behind them, the cold, unforgiving sea. In front of them, the most ruthless military machine the world had ever seen, closing in fast. Nearly 400,000 men were pinning their last hopes on a strip of sand. The British Army was about to be utterly annihilated, and with them, the last hope of a free Europe. The generals in London had already written them off. The Prime Minister was preparing a speech to announce the greatest military disaster in history. But then, the British government made a desperate, almost insane broadcast to the public. They didn't ask for warships. They asked for something else. This is the story of Dunkirk, but not the one you know from history books. This is the story of how ordinary bartenders, fishermen, and teenagers sailed straight into the mouth of hell, armed with nothing but wooden boats and pure, unadulterated courage. To understand the sheer terror of Dunkirk, we have to look at the map. In the spring of 1940, the Nazi blitzkrieg had completely shattered the Allied lines. In just a few weeks, the French and British armies were pushed back, outmaneuvered, and cornered. They ended up on the beaches of Dunkirk, a French port town. Picture this: 400,000 men crammed onto a flat, open beach. There are no trenches. There are no caves to hide in. There is only sand and sky. And from that sky, German Stuka dive bombers are screaming down, dropping bombs that rip through the crowds. The British Navy tried to send big destroyers to rescue them, but the water was too shallow. The massive warships couldn't get close to the shore. They were sitting ducks, hit by torpedoes and sinking into the English Channel, taking hundreds of soldiers down with them. The situation was so grim that the British military command launched Operation Dynamo, their official estimate. They hoped they could save maybe 30,000 men before the beach was completely overrun. 30,000 out of 400,000. The rest were meant to be killed or captured. On the beaches, soldiers stood in lines stretching out into the water, waiting for hours, buried up to their necks in the freezing sea, just hoping a boat would come. Hope was dying. The men were exhausted, starving, and terrified. And then, across the English Channel, the telephone lines began to ring. But what happens when the world's greatest navy fails? What happens when a superpower runs out of options? You don't call the military. You call the people. On May 14th, the BBC broadcast a strange, brief order from the Ministry of Shipping. It requested all owners of self-propelled pleasure craft from 30 to 100 feet in length to register their boats immediately. The government didn't tell them why. They didn't tell them where they were going. But the people knew something was terribly wrong. And what they did next didn't just change the course of World War II. It redefined what human solidarity actually means. They called them the little ships. Suddenly, the Thames River and the southern ports of England were alive with activity. These weren't warships. These were wooden ferries, private yachts, standard fishing boats, and even lifeboats from the London Fire Brigade. The Navy tried to requisition the boats to sail them with military crews, but there wasn't enough time. So, the civilians refused to step down. Imagine being a 50-year-old accountant or a 16-year-old boy who spent his weekends sailing with his dad. Suddenly, you are turning your small wooden boat toward the open sea. You can hear the distant, terrifying rumble of heavy artillery echoing across the water. You know exactly where you are heading. You are heading into a war zone. Over 850 of these civilian boats set sail. When they arrived at Dunkirk, the scene was apocalyptic. The town was burning. Thick black smoke blotted out the sun, and the water was filled with debris and oil. But these little ships did what the massive destroyers couldn't. Because they had shallow hulls, they could sail right up to the sand. Ordinary citizens steered their boats through explosions, dodging machine gun fire from German fighters. They pulled freezing, oil-soaked soldiers out of the water. Men who had lost all hope looked up to see a local fishing boat from their hometown pulling up to save them. One famous ship, the Sundowner, was commanded by Charles Lightoller. He was 66 years old, a retired civilian. Decades earlier, he had been the second officer and the senior-most survivor of the Titanic. Now he was dodging Nazi bombs to save a new generation of young men. His boat was built to hold 21 people. He jammed 130 soldiers inside it and brought them home. For 9 days, this impossible armada went back and forth, completely exposed, completely relentless. When the operation finally ended on June 4th, the numbers shocked the world. They didn't save 30,000 men. The little ships, working alongside the Navy, rescued over 338,000 soldiers. When the soldiers finally arrived back on the shores of England, they expected to be booed. They felt like failures. They had lost the battle, lost their equipment, and retreated. But as they stepped off the boats, they didn't find angry crowds. They found thousands of citizens holding blankets, hot tea, and trains waiting to take them home. The defeat had turned into an undeniable triumph of the human spirit. Dunkirk was a brutal military defeat, but it became one of the most deeply moving moments in human history. It gave birth to the phrase, the Dunkirk Spirit, the idea of a people coming together in the darkest hour, refusing to give up, even when the odds are mathematically impossible. It reminds us that history isn't just made by generals in stone offices or politicians signing treaties. Sometimes, history is altered by ordinary people who decide that doing nothing is simply not an option. The next time you face a situation where you feel completely overwhelmed, outmatched, and cornered, remember the beach at Dunkirk. Remember that sometimes salvation doesn't come in the form of a massive battleship. Sometimes it comes from a line of tiny wooden boats sailing bravely through the smoke, refusing to let the darkness win.